Guy, it's good to see you on the Zoom. Apologies for running a little late. We have 15 minutes with you. Want to acknowledge the submission that you've given us, really useful. If you'd like to leave some time for questions, we'd appreciate it, but we are completely in your hands. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, and lovely to be here, and thank you for the 15 minutes. I really appreciate it. I love Maureen's comment about bizarre when she was referring to the previous submitters, lived experience scenarios, and honestly, so many of the situations that we look at, you can only look at as bizarre. So often they can be resolved with common sense, but we need more than common sense for these things to be resolved on an ongoing basis and to change, New Zealand to the way that we want it to be. I'm wearing a number of different hats today. I'm the chairperson and founder of the Dyslexia Foundation. We've been involved in 20 years of advocacy. In 2016, we were involved in an inquiry, the great thing was there were a number of changes that were made, but the problem with the last inquiry back in 2016 was that the things that really counted, the things that were really going to make a difference, were not things that were actioned, and I hope that that's not going to be the case with this legislation that's before Parliament. I'm also representing or speaking for many people who are not only dyslexic, but might have other neurodiversities, because we have a lot of experience in that space. I'm also speaking from the perspective of being the co-founder and managing director of Cookie Time Limited, so I hope to bring the voice of business to the table as well. I think that's a voice that possibly isn't well represented, and I can speak very strongly about that and answer any questions about how this legislation might be, how businesses might respond to it. And I'm also the father of 4. I've got dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, Asperger's, ADHD, and severe mental health in our family. So I'm coming from a place of lived experience through my family members. It was 3 years ago when I first heard of the Access Matters group, and I was travelling in the South Island, and it was a Friday when I received an email late that evening, and further to a brief chat earlier that day. I woke up in Hamner at 6 a.m. To read the email, which was 100 pages of legal speak outlining what Access Matters wanted for New Zealand. And I was absolutely blown away with how this legislation, if it got through, could change New Zealand. What excited me also was that all the political parties were aligned. So I think that we've got a real opportunity here. The problem is essentially that what's before you to consider is it hasn't got enough teeth. When the DFNZ came on board with Access Matters, the first thing we did was to change the language to ensure that it included the lived experiences of being dyslexic or having a neurodifference. For example, for many, disability is a word that has become empowering and something to be proud of, and that's really important that we use that word for those people. However, for many dyslexics, they identify with it being a difference or a preference. So for the legislation, we need an inclusive definition of disability. I prefer talking about those that have accessibility needs, or accessibility is where the rubber meets the road, where you are disabled, have a difference, or are aging. Unfortunately, the proposed legislation is not going to work as it is envisaged. It has become diluted and toothless. Frankly, I believe that the way that it's being presented is pathetic, and we really do need to make some changes to it. This is a real opportunity to get it right. I think the path of least resistance has been determined by bureaucrats. And I think that the process that's undergone to get to the point that we are today has been diluted by fears and myths that are simply not real. This is not a big thing to do. It just needs to be done, and we need to make sure that we have the courage to do it. The good news is that despite what the bureaucrats might say, it's not difficult. They might, for example, say that business will be against it, but this is a myth that is utilised to dilute and create fear and inertia. It's time in simple language to push the bullshit button in terms of those kind of myths. As an example, with Cookie Time Limited, we've taken the approach of incorporating accessibility and accommodating disability needs of employees into our health and safety framework. Every business has health and safety sorted these days. We look for hazards with a magnifying glass every day. How hard is it to look for accessibility issues every day in the same way, and by doing so deliver emotional and psychological health and safety? So we're utilising the health and safety framework to bring it into play in the business, and it's just not a problem. And here's the kicker: when you look there, there are actually not that many accessibility issues to be found. It's actually a tiny issue compared to health and safety, and issues that are found are most often small and easily sorted. They are small things, but they do make a huge difference to those being impacted. There's also a commercial opportunity by tapping into the accessibility market. Supermarkets that extend hours and change the lighting and sound to allow those with sensitivity to shop without stress would be a good example. And the purple dollar in the UK is well documented as being something of value to business. And the other thing, just to wrap up the business comment, businesses already have the problem, so to speak. On average, 15% of their workforce is neurodiverse, and thus they already have a sunk cost with people who are neurodiverse. With a mindset shift, this sunk cost and the potential problem becomes an opportunity. With simple changes, people with neurodifferences can deliver so much more. So I think businesses must be included in the legislation. That's absolutely critical. And businesses shouldn't fear the legislation at all. It's actually a great thing for business, great thing for culture, a great thing overall. And although bureaucrats are a problem, the elephant in the room for this discussion is actually discrimination. Discrimination is the inverse of accessibility. It occurs every time a person cannot access the physical environment, transportation, websites, etc. With disability being a hidden difference, accessibility is most often not as obvious. Discrimination causes disengagement and disenfranchisement, leading to alienation, mental health issues, acting out, truancy and crime. On the flip side, accessibility gathers the disengaged and disenfranchised into the community and provides a pathway for people to feel valued and all the positives that come from that. Isn't that what we all want? The Human Rights Act and the process of seeking resolution simply isn't working. It lacks specifics and teeth, and it takes a great amount of time, effort and cost to make a complaint. Something needs to change. It places the victim of discrimination in a very difficult position. So although we do have legislation around discrimination, that legislation simply isn't working. We have a number of complaints before the Human Rights Tribunal and Commission, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. If it was easier for people to show and to communicate the difficulties that they're having, and we had a process that acknowledged those and made the necessary changes, we'd find that a lot of the difficulties would go away. So in brief, the DFNZ recommends an inclusive definition of disability, an extended scope to include businesses, greater committee powers, a 3-year review and timely accountability to the House of Representatives, accessibility standards, a regulator, a barrier notification system, and a dispute resolution process to remove access barriers. So although we have the essence of something that is fantastic, it's miles off what it needs to be in order to be effective and in order to create a society that everybody agrees that we want. So the key challenge to Parliament at the moment around this is to have the courage to do the difficult things, knowing that the difficulties and the challenges won't be long lasting. It's not nearly as difficult as what we imagine at the beginning of the process. I'm certainly open for questions and to unpack any of those points.
Yeah, thank you so much, Guy. I really appreciate the purple dollar being brought into the conversation as well, because I think that, and the business side of things, I think it's a really important aspect. Now, the first question will go to Liz, and then we'll come to Maureen. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Thank you for a really comprehensive written submission as well as an oral one. One of the things that's touched on, you mentioned it briefly in your oral submission, but also in your written, is 3 years versus 5 years for the review period. Because often when we establish something or change something, it takes a while for changes to bed in, and then we can start to see how that's tracking, and then we can start to see what might need to change. Can you talk a bit more about why you're recommending a shorter review period?
Well, I think it just comes down to wanting some urgency and for wanting the issues and the opportunity to review to come, before those that review it a bit more quickly. I would lean on my business experience in terms of, yes, of course, it takes time to embed things and make things happen, but it's always good to review things at an early stage, just in case there are some very obvious things that need to change, and we simply save wasted energy. So just from that simple practical perspective, my suggestion is 3 years as opposed to 5. 5 seems a long way out to be reviewing things. It's really as simple as that. It's more of a practical issue from my perspective, you know, having managed similar situations but in a different context before.
Thanks, that's useful.
Thanks, Guy. We'll come to Maureen now.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Thanks so much, Guy. We could probably extend this conversation for the rest of the day, but I'm likely to only get 1 or 2 questions. So can I start with the greater committee powers? We've talked a bit about this today. So in terms of the committee powers, because what we're trying to do is improve this bill, and you know, there is obviously scope for a larger piece of work, but the committee as it is advisory to the minister. So what can you see us doing to strengthen the bill to perhaps give that committee more authority?
Well, I think, you know, we've framed this up as kind of a committee about a committee about a committee, and we know that although there can be a lot of benefits from that process, when it comes to these issues, we really need a more regulatory approach being taken. It's like health and safety. I mean, before we actually added some teeth to the Health and Safety Act, people gave lip service to health and safety. You often, you know, took the mickey out of it. Oh yeah, health and safety need 2 ladders, 3 people, all the rest of it. I think that in terms of health and safety, we've gone, everybody, including myself, has gone through a journey of a blasé approach to knowing how important it is, and also knowing how it's a mindset. Okay, and I think that that's what we need here. And if we've just got a committee considering the issues and referring those up to the minister, all we're going to do is get more talk. What we need is walk. Okay, and we need some real teeth in it. And you know, the health and safety, what's happened with health and safety in New Zealand, and the improvements that we've seen, and the way that businesses have responded and people have responded, that's what we need to happen here. And we've got a blueprint for what we need. And I mean, health and safety has some pretty strong regulatory requirements, and if you don't attend to those responsibly, then there are very real consequences. And fortunately, not that many people have to see the consequences, because they recognise that they need to make the change before that. And that's what we need here. It's just, we need something to really push this across the line.
Okay. Have I got another one, Madam Chair?
Yes, we do have a question from Tony here as well, though. So
Let her go. Yeah, it's fine.
go for it, Maureen.
Okay, thank you. The other one is in terms of the business. Look, the Purple Pound information was amazing. You know, that untapped customer base, for example. But when you're an employer and you're in a market, an employment market where, you know, there is very few available workers, how do you as a business owner then balance perhaps the perceived risk of employing someone with a disability versus someone who is seen more as either able-bodied or more you know, better cognitive skills? And I use the example of myself having worked with a boss who had dyslexia, and because I did the back house support and accounts for him, I had to be really vigilant of him transposing numbers, because they could make quite a big difference to the accounting system. So, you know, how do you manage as an employer that risk, and how do you encourage people to be open about their condition so that you can accommodate them?
Well, the great news here is that every business in New Zealand already has neurodiverse individuals working in their workforce already. So the good news is the problem already exists. Okay, and therefore, if we make it safe through legislation for a neurodiverse individual to disclose that they've got difficulties in numbers, or difficulties in words, or difficulties with sensory issues, if we make it safe for them, then they're going to start to talk about it to their employer, okay, and the employer will have to take action. Now, for many employers, I appreciate, with the lack of understanding that they have about neurodiversity, that might sound like a lot of work to do, a lot of potential difficulties and problems. The good news is that the problem is never that as big as what they think it is. And with understanding, the reality is that those people can become even more empowered and capable employees. So we don't need to worry about new people coming into the workforce. We've already got the opportunity, and that's people that are already in the workplace now. We just need them to come out and say, this is what my needs are. And now, because of this legislation, I have a right to disclose that. And I have a reasonable expectation that something's going to be done about it. So I don't think that's a problem at all to be worried about, because the problem already exists. And for businesses, it's a sunk cost. So, we already have 15% of our workforce, which we're already paying for. We can't remove from the workplace. Okay, it's already a sunk cost. What we can do now is we can make that sunk cost work for us even more by empowering and supporting and providing simple accommodations in the workplace to get more out of those people that are already employed. So at no level is this a problem for business, as I see it.
Great.
Thank you, Guy. Unfortunately, we've actually come to the end of our time now, but both Tony and Jan did have some questions for you, and perhaps we can maybe send those on or ask them in another forum, I'm not sure. But look, thank you so much for your submission. Really thoughtful, very useful. Brought up a couple of points that haven't been raised before, and I really appreciate the business perspective, in particular, the PCBU issue as well. So I appreciate that. But we do need to move on, unfortunately, to have everyone heard today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So we now have Victoria Edwards by Zoom, and I am going to hand the chair